Hello, everybody. My name is Flash177. Today's in Speedrun Education Podcast Episode number 6, I believe. And today I have Davesterio with me. A beautiful, beautiful guy, obviously. And I know him through Celeste, but he's also known for other speedruns, such as the Final Fantasy series speedruns. Hey, Dave. Let's introduce yourself.
Hey, how's it going, Flash? Really, appreciate you having me on here and everything. But yeah, so, to just kind of like introduce myself, I got my start in the speedrunning scene with Final Fantasy VII, moving on to like Final Fantasy X and some other Final Fantasy games. I also speedrun a lot of platformers, Celeste, Ukulele and the Impossible Layer, did a little bit of band. Honestly, like, I don't really stick to one genre with speedrunning.
Mm-hmm.
I have some FPS runs, but I'd say, like the bread and butter is definitely the RPG speedruns, But yeah, we're trying to get that sub 30 in Celeste, what it's like.
Yeah. Sub 30 feels like the biggest milestone for most people. But actually, before we start with like the actual topic of today, how does it happen that you branch out so much? Do you just want to not only experience RPGs, or do you just like to speedrun many, many games? Like, I've seen you picked up so many games in the 12-hour challenge because your stream wants you to.
Yeah, okay, so the initial hook, like for watching speedruns, it was honestly Ocarina of Time any %, just the fact that, hey, here's how the wrong warp glitch works. And I'm like, oh, hey, is there anything like that in Final Fantasy VII? Which I'm sure we'll get into some of that stuff later in the podcast. But yeah, it turns out, there's some pretty crazy things you can do with RPG runs. And then I just go back to my childhood and it was like, oh, I used to beat Banjo-Kazooie in a single sitting. I should learn Banjo-Kazooie. Or, oh, I really like Halo, so I'm going to learn Halo 1. It was mostly going back through, the childhood catalog, and then, and then there's just, happy accidents, so to say, where it's like, oh, hey, the Celeste game comes out and it happens to be amazing. So I'm just really interested in why things work in games, why certain glitches work or why certain movement tech is the way it is and how it can be applied to a playthrough.
Yeah, I think many people can relate to that, hey, I love this game from my childhood, and I see a speedrunner destroy it in, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I want to do this myself. And that's how most of us started with. But yeah, let's actually move on to RPGs, because I have actually not that much experience with RPG speedruns. I have a little experience with it, but not so really. I went back in the day when I was trying to figure out what the right speed game is for me. I was testing a little bit with Undertale and Earthbound, but I didn't find my way that deep into it. So what excites you about RPG speedruns? Why did you pick that up in the first place? Speaking of, for example, Final Fantasy VII, which is, I believe, your like most speedrun game.
Yeah. So, as a kid, I have one memory where I was like, okay, I'm going to beat this game in a single sitting. And, I pulled an all-nighter that honestly, it took around like 30 hours in game time. I was maybe like 9 years old, honestly, when I did that. And, not even thinking of speed running. It's just like, hey, I'm at my cousin's house for a weekend. We're going to play video games all night. And I'm just going to beat FF7 in a single sitting. But in terms of like in the speedrunning scene, one of the first things that's really apparent is, oh, hey, you walk through the game, you get these random encounters.
Yeah.
Well, they're not actually random, and it's manipulated with perfect movement and counting certain walking steps, because you can walk steps or run steps. And like that's the first like brain blast moment where you're like, what? The encounters aren't random.
Yeah.
And yeah, just discovering all these little things with the game. So it is the length. It's not something you're supposed to do, I guess, like, beat a game like that in a single sitting. And then it's also just the pure tech involved with the speedrun is just so fascinating to me,
So let's talk more about this RNG manipulation, because I haven't heard of it before. Like, how does it exactly work? For example, in Final Fantasy VII. Okay,
so all right, here, I'm gonna use a visual. So here, like when you run and progress through the game, you're increasing what's called a danger value. So it's this value that's constantly increasing. And then if you could imagine a bunch of like stalactites or like lines coming down on this graph, these would be the battle checks. And like, say a battle check is right here and your danger value is this.
Mm-hmm.
when your danger value aligns with the battle check, it will check if the danger value exceeds the battle check, and if it does, it initiates a battle. But if not, your danger value increases until it inevitably hits a battle check that will initiate a fight. And where it gets really interesting is the walking and running affects your danger value differently. So in a situation where you would normally hit a battle check, if you walk steps, it'll decrease it such that you kind of pass underneath the encounter. And of course, you'll eventually hit something because your danger value is ever increasing. Mm-hmm. But so that's kind of, I mean, it's one of the best ways that I could do it without like a graph visual.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like pretty much you are walking steps to avoid encounters that are on this step route. And since we hard reset the console every time, it's always consistent. And where it can actually get pretty cool is some of the boss fights, you can get what's called a preemptive encounter, where the boss is turned around and you get 3 first turns at least. You get like a jump on the boss, and it's kind of fascinating where it's actually tied to where you're at in this step manipulation. Mm-hmm. So not only are we just manipulating encounters to get less and more favorable encounters in the run, we also manipulate the position of certain boss fights. Also, there is one glitch that we do in Final Fantasy VII called the Stinger Skip, where you're supposed to pass through these 2 spider webs that are on a screen, and it initiates a fight with the spider. But if you can force a random encounter on the exact frame in which you would pass through the spider webs, it just cancels out both encounters.
Okay.
So we're doing pixel and frame perfect movement to make sure that like we pass through these 2 webs on the exact frame that we're supposed to. Also, one of the things you can do in FF7 is if you know exactly where you're going to get an encounter, you can open and close the menu on that exact frame, and that'll actually make it so you don't get the encounter. We can't do that for every encounter in the game, though, and this is because it would either ruin the step count, or if you skip an encounter before what you would call like an event battle, pretty much anything that's not initiated by the danger value, such like a boss fight or anything that happens in the story, if you skip an encounter before that, you get what's called the duplicating boss glitch, and after you finish the fight, it'll literally just initiate another one, and then once you beat that one, you soft lock the game.
Okay.
So yeah, like, I don't know, when you get into step manipulation, it starts off with just, okay, we're gonna minimize our encounters, but when you can really apply it to the run, there's so many crazy things you can do with it.
I mean, just by listening to you, I was like, at so many points, wait, that sounds like extremely crazy. I would have never thought about that. Now, like, all of a sudden, RPG speedruns sound like 10 more times more interesting to me than before. And, like, holy shit. I don't even think... I don't even think anybody who's listening right now got all of it, because I didn't either.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But I think it's fine. I think it's fine. It just shows, hey, RPG speedruns, they are not for the easy kids. They're still, like, super complex. Wow. That's... Just to think about it.
It's a super huge information dump. But I should also add that, like, if you lose this manipulation at any point in the run, it's done. You literally cannot get it back.
Okay.
So you need 8 hours of perfect, so
that makes a big difference, I believe. Yeah. So when you use the step counter thing, you just try to explain. If you mess it up at one point, it's messed up for the entire rest of the run. Is that correct? Wow. Okay. That makes sense. Now I understand why. Like, I was thinking sometimes when I watch these speedruns, hey, why is there still so many random encounters? I thought there's the step counter thing, but now it makes a lot more sense to me. Cool. Well, yeah. I think we already answered one question I have prepared, because I want to ask, like, what makes yourself so excited to watch RPG speedruns? But when you have that knowledge, I think the question is already answered. It's like, wow, I can see it can be kind of hype for other RPG speedrun fans to watch RPG speedruns at like marathons or something.
Because there's you play the game the way you always played the game, like casually, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start really diving into this tech, it gets so insane, man. It gets so insane.
Yeah, it's basically with every other speedrun. I mean, you just said you speedrun also Celeste. I speedrun Celeste. The first time I watched a speedrun, I was like, I didn't know you can move that fast. I was like so mind-blowing. That's what was the first reason why I picked it up, because it looked like so cool. I want to do it myself because I want to impress others eventually, or want to impress myself that I can do this. And now hearing from Final Fantasy VII that it can go the same direction. It can be equally insane as Celeste. It's like, but you have to know to have the knowledge. You need the knowledge, but that's what we are getting here. Wow, that was already really, really awesome. So, is RPG speedruns more like getting RPG speedruns are probably then more like getting more knowledge than execution, or where is the balance there? Because I feel in Celeste, for example, or more execution heavy games, obviously the execution matters far more. And I've always heard people say, RPG speedruns, you need a ton of information, and that makes a good runner a great runner.
Yeah, like, they are giant games with a lot of moving parts, whether it be like all the items or like things about the enemies. A lot of people say, or they want to say it's all like RNG.
Yeah, that's what I thought before this interview, and now I was like already, well, fuck RNG. We thrown it out of the window already.
Yeah, it's like, I like to say that RNG opens the door for, like decent things to happen, but you need the execution to walk through. And one of this doesn't really apply to RNG, but the way you can lose the most time in RPG speedruns is your menuing.
I want to talk about menuing, like, because I know most people underestimate menuing so heavily.
That is literally like any idle frame is against you. You're not waiting for the game to do something, it's you, and you need to know exactly what you need to do. So for my menus and stuff, you're dealing with complex menus with a lot of like items or things that you can equip, and I know exactly every single input that I do, where everything slots. If you have to use L1 or R1 to page up or page down quickly, I know exactly where I'm gonna land. I know every single input, and that's because it's any idle second is against you. So.
Yeah, true. I feel like that's like the biggest difference maker. I thought about that in RPG speedruns. Like, what is probably the biggest difference maker? It's probably menuing, because like the beginners, they are just like, they will be stuck for several seconds before they know where they have to move, and the pros are just like collecting everything. And I mean, even in not so menu having games such as, I don't know, Ocarina of Time in the 100% category, I think ZFG also knows completely where he has to move. But in RPG speedruns, especially when you have huge menu sections, it gets like a lot more crazy, I feel like. So yeah, menuing is totally underestimated. I even make the joke sometimes in my own streams in Celeste that like, where you just have to skip a cutscene, that can also be sometimes very hard to skip a fucking cutscene, to do one menu input. And in RPG speedruns, I can see it's being a lot harder.
Yeah, and I guess another thing in terms of execution, for Final Fantasy VII in particular, you have the time bars that fill up and allow you to get a turn where you can do something.
Yeah.
There's something called ATB wait tricking, where the time system is called ATB, or active time battle, and you can switch it to wait, where if you have an option selected, time will be frozen in place. So what you can do is, you got your 3 party members. You can initiate something with 2 of those party members and then hold time with the 3rd one. And this is advantageous because you wait until the other 2 party members have done their moves, and then you release time and put through the command with the 3rd character. And this is to allow you to maximize you gaining time. So, like, if you were to just initiate all the turns, you'd be filling up time bars one at a time with each character instead of all of them as a group. And this is all time that your opponent is gaining as well. So, for example, you could be squeezing in 5 turns for every enemy turn. or you could be getting 3 turns for every enemy turn. And some runners aren't realizing that they are leaking time for the enemy. And there's even some more advanced ATB tactics that, I mean, this is hard enough to try to explain without visuals.
You don't have to go that deep, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine, it's fine already.
So, bottom line, execution is there. It's not just RNG. Yes.
Crazy, man. No, it's so... Wow. maybe I should get into an RPG one day, because back when I was a child, I was like saying, or a few years ago, I was saying RPG is probably one of my more favorite game genres, but I've never really dived deep into a speedrun of it. Maybe one day, because that sounds all like really crazy and really interesting, to be honest. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, so before we move to how you get started with RPG speedruns, I want to ask one more thing about just the fights you mentioned, because we said knowledge is really important. And are fights still random, or are they also manipulatable?
Like in terms of like the turns of the enemies?
Yeah, what they are doing with their turns. Okay. Is that random still? Or like when you get a random encounter, in quotes, that they can mess you up at some point? Or is it just boss fights? Or are boss fights always like straight clear what's going to happen?
There are certain boss fights that have predictable turn orders where it is pretty mechanical. Where it can, sort of be offset is whether or not they get a critical hit on you, and they do double damage to you.
Yeah.
Or if they have like a status effect where it's like, oh, this move has a chance to put you to sleep. And so, or like the targeting, it could choose to disperse its damage evenly across the 3 characters, or it just focuses the one character that you need to use for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. FF7 in particular is very volatile. Most bosses can do something that can kill you. And yeah, so there is randomness to the bosses. I mean, some bosses just straight up do random turns. Some of them have set turns, but there is randomness whether or not they crit. So it is actually a little mix of both. Something like Final Fantasy X, though, for 7, I was saying, oh, hey, this is an active time game. Final Fantasy X in particular has very set turn orders that are based on...
I've played that game.
Yeah, it is true turn-based, and the turns are dictated by your agility stat. So if your menus are all the same, you know exactly the turn orders of every fight, and they do play out mechanically. Granted, there is some variance that can be had in FF10, but that one is way more straightforward in all of the boss execution than something like FF7, where a boss could derail you and you have to be doing, yellow strats or whatever.
Okay. So it's still like sometimes you still have to adjust on the fly. Or the boss is giving me that kind of attack, or he's focusing one of my guys. I need to change up things. It's still like, you still need to know how you have to oh god, I can't speak myself. You still need to know how to change things up if they go wrong in that sense, right?
Yeah, correct.
And that all comes probably by just playing the game a whole bunch and understanding what the boss can do.
Most certainly, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked, wow. I didn't thought that this part will take so long, but that was like awesome information. I really loved this episode already. So let's say someone is listening to this and you talked so much great stuff about Final Fantasy VII, and they are like, hey, I played that game as a child. I want to speedrun it for whatever reason. What would you recommend them to start with? Like, what to watch out for? Yeah, just go ahead. I think you can answer the question better than I can ask it.
Okay, yeah. So, like, if FF7 in particular is something you want to get into, and this kind of mentality can be applied to any sort of long game, definitely break it up into chunks. I suggest that people learn the Midgar segment, which is like the first 2 hours of the run. Mm-hmm. This really gets you acquainted with just how the movement feels. And if you're going to do something like step manipulation, you need to know exactly which direction. Like, for example, all of the screens are like isometric in FF7. So like up, if you're pressing up on the D-pad, you could go one way on one screen and another way on a different screen. So you need to know the exact directions of every screen if you're going to do step manipulation. also just with the fact of, some people just aren't used to long gaming sessions like that.
Yeah, true.
So you learn the first 2 hours of Midgar, and then you learn Disc 1, which is like 5 hours. And then Disc 2 and 3, you can group together because that's like the final 3 or 4 hours of the run. But yeah, you definitely compartmentalize things and practice it. And then you get used to just playing longer and playing longer and playing longer. And also, for FF7, I would recommend people not get caught up on step manipulation. Like, learn boss strats, and don't be afraid to save. And like, also, you don't have to do it in a single sitting at first. Something like FF10, you can just like save the game, do whatever you have to do, and then pick up the run from where you left off. I mean,
is that officially allowed? Just as a random question, throwing it inside, is that officially allowed by the speedrun leaderboard or like the community?
No, so you do have to do single segment if you're doing leaderboard, but like just for learning the run, save the game, take breaks, watch videos, analyze stuff. That's one of the biggest things that I could recommend is compartmentalize the game, practice it in chunks, and then for FF7 in particular, don't let losing step manipulation stop you from furthering your practice, because with FF7, you're gonna find a million ways to kill your run and lose step manipulation. So just play the game.
Yeah, play the game, get a time in, or like get the practice in. Because I think in most speed games, it's like really easy to get hung up by trying to be too perfect in the beginning, and you never end up having a run. And I can see in longer games, especially in longer games, it can be easily like, oh shit, I don't get this after like how many hours of practicing, and you have not even done like 50% of the entire run, and you will just end there. And it's like kind of sad because it's a missed opportunity eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I guess one thing I didn't even touch on is emulator. If you could use emulators or debug tools for your game, take advantage of those. Like, save states are literally your best friend. Speed up to get through like dialogue and stuff. Emulator is so underrated. It makes practice so much more efficient.
I think emulators like of older games make practice in speedrunning so much easier, because some newer games, they have like no good way to get around practice other than just playing with what the official game gives you. And the emulators I can see really, really helping there. Are emulators allowed to do runs on the leaderboard? So
there is a separate category
for emulator.
In FF7 at least. This isn't the case for all, it's on a community by community basis. There is a category called PSX Digital, where it also encompasses the PlayStation TV, if you're familiar with that console. It's like PS TV and emulator. It's all kind of grouped into one category. But
also the PC version.
Basis.
Like there's a Steam release of FF7, as far as I know. Is it that also includes in that category?
That is actually its own separate tab. And this is because of the way the game stores save files in memory. There's some crazy glitches that you can do to beat FF7 in 3 hours on the PC version.
Oh, okay.
By abusing the way saves are handled, and you can warp you actually warp into the debug room of the game, which isn't accessible anywhere. So,
strange. That sounds all strange all of a sudden again.
It gets weird.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So would you just say start with in FF7 start with the regular any percent category, which is like the long category, or are there different categories, or is there a category that's especially good for beginners, for example?
Yeah, it's cool that you mentioned that, because the most popular category in FF7 is called any percent no slots, where slots is a move that can be learned by one of the party members. And it allows you to insta-kill any enemy in the game, which, I mean, that sounds like you're trivializing the run. It still is incredibly difficult in execution, but people like to watch you come up with strategies for defeating all the bosses without this sort of insta-kill move. So the main category is any percent no slots. There is any percent as well. So any percent no slots, I would say people play that primarily, or like I would tell people to play that primarily. But honestly, a lot of people do get their start in Final Fantasy VII by doing PC any percent, typically just because it is a 3-hour category as opposed to like, and it's an 8-hour category if you're like good at the game. You know, your first run's going to be like 11 to 12 hours or something.
Yeah, true. You also have to measure that in.
Yeah, so people do like starting off with PC any, like honestly, PC any percent is the most popular category on like has the most submissions because of its length. But any percent no slots is definitely like the category to watch for FF7. So yeah.
Cool. One thing I feel like many people will be afraid is that they don't, like, if they are not full-time streamer or have a busy life themselves, are parents or whatever, they probably have not the time to speedrun an 8-hour game every day. So how should they, let's say they want to pick it up, they seriously want to pick it up, but they only have like each and every weekend maybe time for it. How should they move on and get better at it then? Because like their lack of full runs, or would you just straight up say better pick up another speed game or another category, so to say?
So like how I got started, you know, I was working fast food at the time, and you know my shifts would start at 10 a.m. So I knew that if I started at like, and you know that not everybody has to do this, but I knew like from the hours of like 7:30 until 9:30, I could do a Midgar run, you know, like nice 1.5 to 2 hour category, where I just practiced and familiarized myself with the game. And then maybe when I got home from the shift, I could resume and do just a disc 1 run, which was around like 4.5 to 5 hours. Like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to run the full game at all times. You know, or if you want to pick up from the end of disc 1 and play from disc 2 to disc 3, and you know you get your practice in for each chunks of the game, and then it's like, okay, Saturday I have off and it's go time. We're doing the full game that day. Yeah, it does get difficult planning your life around an 8-hour speedrun because not everybody has 8 hours or more, you know, depending on your level. But yeah, I would definitely, you know, it's not all about run legitimacy and leaderboards. It's like if you want to learn how to play FF7 in an advanced way or eventually beat it in a single sitting, you know, just again, compartmentalize your practice and your runs. You know, do disc 1 runs. It's like, yeah, there's not a leaderboard category for it, but you know, nothing's stopping you from playing the game. And then eventually, when you do got the time, you know, you got a free weekend or whatever, yeah, do the full run.
Yeah, I see that's being like very handy. Yeah, I would have. Yeah, cool. I don't know what else to say. It's like literally just don't think. I think that was my problem back in the day, or when I was thinking about these things. Like some people will be so frustrated to not speedrun the entire run, and I personally only thought about, hey, how can I get a full run in? But it's not about how to get a full run in. It's about like enjoying the game in your own way, and maybe at some point you have the opportunity to get the full run for the leaderboard or for whatever, for the sake of it. But it's not necessary to enjoy the speedrun in that way. I mean, for just as another example, because I can resonate with that a lot more, I know a ton of Celeste speedrunners who just do ILs before they ever did a full run, and that's like completely fine as well. So why shouldn't it be fine for a longer speedrun where it makes much more sense? In my opinion, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah.
Okay, one thing I was like thinking about: what separates the top runners in such games? Like, what makes one top runner better than another really good runner? Comes it then down to RNG, or is it still like more an execution thing? Let's say in FF7, because we talked only about that game really, or the most part of it. Yeah, just tell us.
Yeah, it's about pure consistency, you know, whether it be consistency of your menus, or in FF7, you cannot, I mean, sometimes you can get really good RNG throughout the game, but you need to have the consistency to know what happens when things don't go your way. There's so many times I see a runner will have something not go their way, and then they kind of just give up because they don't know how to get back on the rails, so to say. So it comes from just the pure consistency of being able to not get wrecked by the game, so to say. So yeah, I'd say menuing, just consistency with bosses, good dialogue mashing. Granted, that can only lose you like maybe like a minute or two throughout the run, depending on how well you do it. But yeah, like that, I'd say the biggest thing is just boss consistency when things don't go correctly, because things are gonna not go correctly, and you need to know how to deal with it. So yeah.
Dialogue mashing. I like how you just said that. Like other speed games, let's say Undertale, I feel like resolve a lot about mashing. How much of a part is it in Final Fantasy though? Because
it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it is pretty prevalent, because the way the dialogue works is the dialogue boxes populate at 6 characters per frame. So what we actually do is we name all the characters one letter, because every time that their name appears in a dialogue box, it shortens the dialogue box. And you can lose frames on every single dialogue box. One thing I'd like to comment on is, a lot of people have the connotation that, mashing is bad and it's unhealthy for you. While that can be true, I am of the mindset that if your mashing is hurting you, you're probably not doing it with proper technique. I personally, here, if I got a controller, I've developed a technique where I do this. I do 2 hands on it, and I've also developed strength from like drumming and stuff. But the key thing is, if your mashing hurts, don't mash that way. And it does become a skill of, all right, you got to do this for 8 hours while also replicating all the inputs required for the run. And it is an endurance challenge. It really is. Mashing is important. Yeah.
Mashing is important. Got it. Well, I feel like we run out of things to ask, but you just said like already so many awesome things. I feel like this episode feels like really complete in its own. Like it was just a brief, hey, that's how RPG speedruns look like. Don't say they are easy or they are RNG reliable that much. Like, yeah, they're totally not, I feel like, at this point. At least Final Fantasy VII is not totally RNG reliable. There are still good runners and new runners and mediocre runners and all of that.
Yeah, sorry if I got a little too information
dense. It was all great. It was all great, I want to say. I mean, we could talk a little bit more about it if you want to dive. If there's one more thing you want to dive really into, you think it's awesome to hear for one of our listeners, then do it and try your best to explain it. And if there's not, then I think we are fine here.
All right, there's like one more thing. And,
okay.
RPG speedruns, like, we want to talk about some RNG manipulation. And, certain games have their own very unique examples of this. But in FF7's case, there is something called the final descent, where you're hopping down on a bunch of rocks to get to the final area. And there's a random chance that you will get an encounter on one of these rocks. It's not tied to your step manipulation. It's like its own seed-based thing in the game. But, if you go back a half hour before that point, there's an instance where you're standing on this giant laser cannon and there's electrical sparks emitting seemingly randomly from the cannon. We do a thing where we pull out a timer and we time each time that we see a spark. And then we take these intervals in between the sparks and we plug it into like this crazy Excel spreadsheet. And that gives us all this information on, hey, here's what RNG seed you're on. Here's how much the RNG is incrementing based on this many frames. And here's your neighboring RNG increments where right now you get 4 encounters. But if you wait 200 frames on this screen, you will accelerate the RNG to a seed where you get like 1 or 0 encounters.
Okay.
And there's crazy things, like Final Fantasy VIII, it's like, okay, you need a 3-digit password for this house. Well, for some reason, the 3-digit password for this area correlates with when you're on a train ride and you look out the window and telephone poles pass through the screen, and you plug in those telephone pole increments into a program, and it allows you to know what the password is. Like there's RPG speedruns, they're like so many things can be linked for whatever reason, and it's a whole world to get into. It's a whole world in itself.
To be honest, how you try to describe it sounds like a gigantic puzzle, and I'm even surprised that some of you figured out stuff like this. It makes no sense that a human being should figure out something like this, but speedrunners tend to do this. They figure out stuff that nobody should figure out. It's like...
I can't take credit for this. Shouts out to the members of the community. First engineer the game and figure out this correlates with this. I just run. So shouts out to them.
True. I also just run, but I'm like always looking to these people who glitch hunt or figuring out how some mechanics of the game work, and then they come up with solutions that are like completely blowing my mind. And just what you explained was like, holy fuck. It's like a gigantic puzzle, and all of a sudden random things come into play and they change a completely other section. It's wow. I really love the fact that I just asked that question so you get this into the episode, because that was like very mind-blowing. RPG speedruns are like a gigantic puzzle, and people figure out stuff that affects other things. It's crazy.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, cool, man. Then thanks for tuning in, everybody. I will give you links to Dave's Twitch and Twitter so you can follow him, because he's obviously an awesome dude. Check him out on Twitch. He streams very regularly, I feel like. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then check him out, and hope you all liked the episode. Hope you all liked the stories to share, and see you soon next time. Bye.
Peace.